Okay, so good morning everyone, and welcome to a fresh new session of IFRS 9 model impairment model development validation. Right, and we'll talk about in today's discussion. We will talk about the basics of. We'll talk about the summarization of the IFRS 9 approaches, the different concepts of IFRS 9 models that we have seen in the last few discussions. Right. So let's get started on that. So basically, the first thing that we looked into was that if I want to develop an IFRS 9 model, right, the first thing that I would do is I would require a portfolio, right. The first thing that I start off by talking about is a portfolio. So what is this portfolio all about? How do we define a portfolio? Yeah. So anyone, how do we define a portfolio?
Yeah, so portfolio is a collection of financial instruments which we are using in our portfolio. It
Okay, so
may
that's
be,
that's from the
uh,
perspective of investments, right? But in
yeah,
in
yeah.
a credit risk perspective, how do you define a portfolio?
So portfolio could be at any level, at
Hmm.
like it could be at financial instrument level,
Hmm.
be it like mortgages is a portfolio, credit cards is a
Right.
portfolio, and
So,
your personal loans is a portfolio. And if
right.
we want to go into the deeper level, we can create a multiple segments
No,
within
no, no,
a
no, no, no.
uh,
Let's not get into
mul-
the segments. Anshu. Let's
okay,
not get into the segments. So, portfolio. Say when I
okay,
say a credit card portfolio, I mean that there is a product credit card which has been subscribed to by a set of people, right? So it's a collection of accounts or a particular product. Right. So a portfolio is designated by three key matrices. One is accounts, second is balance, and the third obviously is delinquency. So these are the three matrices based on which, or three basic matrices of defining a portfolio. Right. Now, when I talk about these things, the next part that comes in together over here is that they refer to a particular type of a product or a particular kind of a banking asset, right? Because you are lending it out, so therefore this is a product or this is a asset, and this asset comprises of a set of borrowers, set of accounts. Now, what type of assets would be falling or would come under IFRS 9? So assets which satisfy the SPPI criteria or the sole payment of principal and interest criteria, right? So this is where your the role of your SPPI or your portfolio or this comes in, right? So IFRS 9 impairment standards are applicable only to assets which satisfy the SPPI criteria, the sole payment of principal and interest criteria. This is also known as the cash flow characteristics criteria, right? Now, once you have once you have identified that this asset is applicable for IFRS and impairment, right? So the next thing that we try to assess is is what type of a product approach does this asset fall under. So should this asset be classified under the generalized approach, or should it fall under the simplified approach? Now, if it's a banking domain, or if it's a bank, then most of the products would be, you know, be falling under the generalized approach. So it's the generalized approach. Or if it's, if it's a trade receivables or a contract receivables kind of a portfolio, then what we have is we use the simplified approach. We use the simplified approach. So till now we are in the process of working with the generalized approach. Right. Okay. So let's say, so what I have over here is, let's say the approach is the generalized approach, because that is the approach that we have been studying kind of till now. So what we want to do is we want to develop the models, or we want to apply the generalized approach for the given portfolio, because the portfolio that we had considered, we started off with, was a retail portfolio. It was a kind of a personal loans portfolio which was there, right? Now the question that comes out over here is that how do we compute the ECL, right? Using the generalized approach. So the first thing that we generally do over here is we stage the accounts. So the accounts are staged basis their risk. So what I have is stage one. Then what I have is stage two, is stage three. So the first thing that we need to understand over here is, so first thing that is done is that the entire portfolios are, or the entire portfolio is staged into three groups: stage one, stage two, and stage three. Now, once this is done, right, the first question that comes out is that on what basis do I create these stages, right? So when we say that the stages are created, so we say that if there is a significant increase in the credit risk of the borrower, then the borrower moves from stage 1 to stage 2, and if the borrower gets impaired, he moves on from stage 2 to stage 3, right?
Yeah. So Tanmay, if we do not have the initial PD for a particular account or a particular portfolio,
Mhm.
so how we'll handle that situation? Like
See,
the initial PD values for a particular thing is not available.
yeah, so generally what would happen is, so if it's a business portfolio, right, so you'll obviously have some kind of
The
an acquisition scorecard, or some acquisition models which would help you understand that okay, at origination what was the probability of the borrower to default, right? So now once the borrower starts operating, right? So after he's operating, so after he operates for a period of time, then you have access to his next 12 months behavior PD as well. Now when you compare the two, you can find out a deterioration. Now that's mostly for retail portfolios, right? For commercial portfolios, mostly the rated portfolios, you'll always have the time. So when the so if I'm actually originating an asset on the books, I'll have its rating at origination, right? So whether it's a triple A plus, double A plus, A minus, whatever it is. Now if I see that the rating has, as on date, the rating has gone down two or more notches, then I know that okay, this asset has undergone a significant increase in credit risk. So for commercial portfolios, you need not always have the origination PD because you'll have the origination rating of that asset or of that particular commercial product or of that of that particular obligor, right? Because for listed companies, you will have that. For unlisted companies that you take up, you need to figure out a way of developing some internal measures of ratings. So, anyways, you will have, so whenever you are acquiring a borrower on your books, right, you will provide do some quantitative or qualitative assessment of his probability to default, right? So now, what we would happen, what we would see is we would see that okay, so if the borrower undergoes a decline in his in his credit ratings or in his probability to default by a certain percentage, then you know that this borrower has faced a significant increase in credit risk. So over here the movement from stage 1 to stage 2 and from stage 2 to stage 3 is a result of significant increase in credit risk, right? Now that's moving from stage 1 to stage 2. Now stage 2 to stage 3, it is impaired. So if the asset gets impaired, right, then the movement happens from stage 2 to stage 3. So all accounts in stage 3 are all impaired accounts, right? So this is stage 1 to stage 2 and
So,
2 to 3. Yeah.
so Tanmay, I have another question
Uh-huh.
here. Let's say, since this IFRS 9 is applicable from 1st January 2018,
Mhm.
and any account is, or any, I'll say any account is acquired on like 1st January 2018, so it will always remain in stage one in 1st January 2018. Is that right?
Right.
Okay.
So at the point of acquisition, right,
Yeah.
your account is always in stage 1, so it has just started paying, right? Now,
So in no
uh-huh.
case we are giving a credit to a customer who is on stage two during initial stage. So every customer
No,
which we are acquiring is in stage one.
yeah, yeah. By default, there is stage 1, so they will be undergoing moving to stage 2 if they exhibit some element of riskiness, if they exhibit say a significant increase in credit risk. So your criteria for significant increase in credit risk, like say an increase in the relative PD from the origination PD, a relative decrease in the observation PD from the or from the from the base PD, the origination PD by more than 3% or more than 5% is treated as a significant increase in credit risk, right? So there are some multiple
So
criteria. So he needs the
so if
time to go into that stage, right? Let's say you give him the loan on Jan 2018, so he's in stage 1. Stage Feb, he misses out the first payment. The moment he misses out the first payment, what happens is he moves into stage 2.
or let's say we have a risky customer or a profile which has a very low credit score. So and we bank has a strategy to charge him a higher rate of interest,
Mhm.
considering that it's a risky borrower. So even that customer will fall in stage one.
Right. So until and unless that borrower, after being taken on your books, does not comment Until unless he commits an element of delinquency, right? At least a delinquency, he cannot be moved to stage two. Because the riskiness that you are talking about at the time of origination is the origination risk. In my portfolio, he may not be such a borrower, he may not be a risky borrower,
Okay.
right? He may not be a risky borrower.
Yeah. And another question here, like, is the change in PD the only criteria to move
No,
the,
no.
uh, okay. So what are
That's
the
one
other
of the criteria.
criterias? So what would be the other criterias?
Yeah, I just showed you. We had discussed this. So basically, one of the criteria is a deterioration in the PD. So from the acquisition PD to the observation PD, whatever deterioration has happened, if the deterioration is pretty significant, then that's a criteria. The second criteria is that you have gone 30 days delinquent. So you were CD zero previously. Now you have moved on to CD one, or by the proper strategies of your bank, you fall in one of the criteria of a high risk borrower, or you have been someone whose lifetime PD shows a deterioration, right? So there are multiple criterias that are there, right? So if you see over here, we had discussed them over here, right? So one of the criteria is the behavior's PD is greater than the acquisition PD. Now, similarly, over here you have a delinquency, an increase in the delinquency, a relative deterioration in the PD, or you fall in a high risk in one of the category, in one of the conditions which is satisfied by high risk borrower. Let's say, for example, my high risk conditions are that this guy has been delinquent at least once in the last 6 months. This guy has, or this guy has missed out or due date of payment, or has made say number of late payments greater than equal to 2. So like this, I'll have
But
a set of criteria, right?
but all these reasons are somewhere directly or indirectly affecting the PD only.
Yeah, but see, now they somewhere affect the PD, right? But the effect may or may not be observed till now. Let's say, for example, the last 6 months, I have missed out. I have been delinquent once, right? So what it means is, it does not necessarily mean that I'll be a defaulter. I may have missed out. I may have had some reasons, but from the bank's perspective, this guy has missed out a payment in the last 6 months, and hence he is a delinquent borrower. He has been delinquent at least once in the last 6 months, and hence he has a greater chances of being a defaulter in the next 12 months. So he's a high risk borrower for me. I know that if he can be delinquent once, he can be delinquent again. Similarly, let's say my one of the criteria is that the is the number of late payments made by the borrower, made by the account is greater than equal to 2. So this guy in the last 6 months had made more than two late payments. So if he has made two late, he may not be a very risky borrower, right? Like this has happened with me a couple of times. Let's say when I was in Kerala, right? I did not know that HSBC did not have a branch over there. So I missed out a payment that month, right? So I mean the payment got delayed. So I had to activate my online banking and then pay it. But I missed that date, right? So in the records of HSBC, when they look back 6 months or 7 months, they will see that okay, this guy has missed a payment out there, no matter what the reason is. So for them, I become a risky borrower. So I become a high risk borrower by their definition. Now, now you think about it that whether the bank is trying to understand whether I have gone a significant increase in credit risk or not. So they'll check, they'll pass me through each of the criteria. Okay, has his PD deteriorated? No. Second, has his has he been 30 days delinquent? No. The third does he fall in under any one of the criteria as a high risk borrower? Yes. So he puts me into stage two. So it's a set of multiple criteria, right? So you may not always satisfy all of them. You might satisfy only one of them. And even if you satisfy one of them, you fall in the you are placed as an SIC, a significant increase in credit risk borrower, right? So So the staging happens this way because see, staging is something which is not actual, right? So I'm not doing actual the staging based on actual borrowers who have defaulted. So it's just a preemptive move to ensure that a borrower who has satisfied any one of these risky criteria is treated appropriately and the provision is kept against his name appropriately. So that is the reason why the staging is done, and the criteria for significant increase in credit risk is varied. So there are multiple criteria, right? You satisfy any one of them, and you are flagged as an SICR.
Yeah. So is the trigger for test for impairment is also one of the reason, or what it is actually if we say test for trigger of impairment or like test for impairment.
Mm. See, impairment is when you default, right? You become 90 days past due, you are directly put into impairment. That is, you are put into stage 3. So before that, so stage 2 represents a case where you are in a transient state. You are not a very good borrower if you are not a non-delinquent borrower. You are not a defaulter. You are somewhere in between. That means what? You are a relatively risky borrower, and I need to provision significantly, or I need to provision myself appropriately against you, right?
Okay.
So when I say significant increase in credit risk, I refer to a case where your riskiness has increased significantly. You are not delinquent, now you are delinquent. You have missed out one payment. Means that if you can miss out one payment going in the next 12 months or in the lifetime, you can end up losing out more payments and you can end up being a defaulter, right? So that is the part that I want to stop, and hence I'm putting a stage 2 and I'm computing the lifetime ECL against you. If you default, what would be the lifetime ECL over the entire tenure that you are there on the books of the bank? But neither are you an actual impairment defaulter at this point of time. So you are not an actual defaulter, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Piyush, when I clear?
Hello, Tanmay, can you hear me?
Yeah, Piyush, tell me.
Yeah, I was asking, so once we build our PD model, then the staging would be assigned, right?
Yeah, so you have a behavior PD in place and you have an origination scorecard which is generating an origination PD, right? So you do a comparison
Yeah.
between the both.
Hmm. Okay.
So this PD model that I'm talking about is a behavior PD model. It's not the IFRS 9 PD model.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the behavior PD model is calibrated with the macroeconomic conditions of the macroeconomic scenarios, and there from there you go and reach your IFRS 9 PD,
Okay.
right? Perfect. So let's think about it in this way. So yeah, so once the staging is done, right? So based on the stage where I belong, right, I would try to compute my ECL. So over here I'll have 12-month ECL, I'll have the 12-month ECL, right? And over here, what we'll have is our lifetime ECL, a lifetime ECL, right? So we have these two broad types of ECL figures over here, right? Now, to do these two ECLs, right? So now the question that comes out is that how is the final ECL figure reached to, right? Okay. So now over here, when you are doing this lifetime ECL, right? Now you think about it like this: that the staging that we are talking about, right? Staging is something which is contingent on the state of the economy, right? Because when the economy is in a good times or when they are passing through good times, you will see that there the distribution would be mm, more towards the stage one, right? So relatively lower proportion of people or lower proportion of the accounts will be going to stage two or stage three, right? Whereas when the economy is in a downturn or the economy is in a situation where uh, you know where the economy is in a situation when it's in a upturn scenario or a downturn scenario, the the distribution of the accounts between the three stages would be very different. During downturns, the relative concentration of the account in stage 2 and stage 3 would be different. So whatever analysis that we are doing over here is contingent on the scenarios that we have with us, right? So each of the staging exercises, so first what we do is we define the scenarios within the model. So first of all, what we do is we define the scenarios. So scenario one is my baseline. So whenever I develop based on my observed data, whatever data I'm using, and I'm developing my model. So those are the baseline scenarios, right? So that's the baseline model, or that's the long run behavior of the model. So this is the baseline. Yeah. So Piyush is a question over here. So the model will be built on the baseline actual scenario. Yes. So it is built on the observed data that you have, right? Now, when your portfolio is stressed, right? So when there is a downturn, when the macroeconomic scenarios are changed. So basically, see, the behavioral variables remain more or less similar across each of the three scenarios. Now, what changes the final PD is the macroeconomic variable. So when the macroeconomic variables change, the PD/LGD measure starts changing, right? So for each scenarios, we need to compute the. You have scenario one as baseline, you have scenario two as downturn, you have as downturn, and scenario three, what you have is your upturn scenarios, right? So now based on these two scenarios, what you do is, or on these three scenarios, you perform your staging analysis, right? Or your staging is performed, right? Basis. So basically what would happen is that for stage 2, right, for the different values of a macroeconomic variables, the accounts are scored, right? The PDs are now higher, the acquisition PD. So from the acquisition PD, there are relatively more number of accounts who have undergone a significant increase in credit risk. Then what you do is these accounts will go to stage 2, lifetime ECL increases, the next 12 month ECL reduces, and then what you see is that for that scenario, the stage 1 ECL reduces, stage 2 and stage 3 ECL increase. So that's for a given scenario. Similarly, for upturn you do it, for baseline you do it. So from each of these scenarios, what we will get is we will get a ECL, right? So we'll get a ECL baseline. You have ECL downturn, and what you have is ECL upturn. So these are the three ECL figures which are created. So from staging to computing the next 12 months PD, to computing lifetime PD, to computing LGD, to computing EAD, all these three are done across each of these three scenarios, and then you obtain three ECL figures which are weighted by the scenario weights, and then what you get is your final PD estimates. Right? Right? So, so this is precisely what we want to do, right? So when we start working with this, so we started talking about the 12 months ECL, we talked about the lifetime ECLs, right? So over here, we see there are some things which become very important in the course of a discussion. One of the very important variables over here become, or one of the very important feeder models over here becomes PD, right? Now this PD is divided into 12 months and lifetime, lifetime PD. So over here, these are the two very important measures that we need to understand, right? So what is the difference between a lifetime PD and you know, a 12 months PD? So when I talk about the 12 months PD, obviously, yes, we understand that it's the next 12 months PD model that we are talking about, to which we talked about adjusting the macroeconomic situations. Now, apart from PD, there are two other important. So, apart from this 12 months PD, I also have a very important input, which is the lifetime PD. Now, from the lifetime PD, I also have some. So, after the even after looking into the lifetime PD, there are a few important variable feeders that we need to look into, and two of the most important feeders that we have over here is one is the LGD and the other is the EAD. So in the discussion today, right, so we will be talking about each of these feeders. We have till now we have been talking about PD estimates, we have been talking about point in time estimates, we have been talking about the next 12 months PD estimates. So that we now we know that in the how is it that the next 12 months PD model is constructed, how is it that the PD model, how is it that the PD model is constructed? How is it that the next 12 months PD model is calibrated with the macroeconomic variables, and how is it that it is a forward looking and a point in time measure? So we are aware of this part, right? So we have looked into the different ways of selecting macroeconomic variables. We have talked about the business way of selecting the macroeconomic variables. So we have identified the statistical measures that we need to focus on, right, to understand the IFRS 9 framework, right? And some of the measures that we have talked about are linear regression is something we need to be thorough about. So then we have the logistic regression, which is something we need to be thorough about. Then we have the time series models that we need to be thorough about, right? So those are the three set of models that we have talked about over here as a part of the statistical exercise. The next thing that we'll talk about over here is what are the other methods that we need to understand, right? To understand lifetime PD, what are the measures? To understand LGD, what are the models? To understand EAD, what are the models? So these are the discussions. So this is the point, or this is the part that we would be talking about in today's discussion. So with this discussion, we'll now have a working idea of the overall framework of IFRS 9, and we'll also have an idea about the statistical methods that we need to be aware of while we are developing an IFRS 9 model, right? So this is something that we will be talking about in the discussions today, right? So is the framework now clear in our mind? Now what are we doing? How has the thing been progressing, and what is the next stage of the discussion that we look to have? Great. Okay. Okay, guys, just give me 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes time, and we'll just get started. Right. Okay. So, in today's discussion, right? So we'll talk about the. So let's start with the lifetime PD. Right. Let's get an idea of this, and from there we'll start talking about the next steps. Fine. So over here, when we are talking about the lifetime expected credit losses, right? So let's first of all try to let's look into a kind of a graphical representation between the two. So why lifetime expected losses? So that is something which is important to understand. So let's take this case. So over here, what we have is this zero, right? And so what we have is we have the deterioration on one side, the deterioration from the original standards. This is deterioration from the base. Initial recognition. Initial recognition, right? And over here, on the other hand, what we have is the loss allowance. Loss allowance, right? Okay. So over here, when we start off with this, so I have the loss allowance. So let's say I want to find out the probability of the borrower to default. So I'll be computing the next 12 months probability of default. So let's say this was something like this, right? Now what happens is, from initial recognition, this guy undergoes a significant increase in credit risk. Now the moment this happens, the overall riskiness of the borrower just shoots up by the intercept. It just shoots up, right, to some extent. Now after this, what I do is I compute the next 12 month. I compute the lifetime losses, and this continues till the account goes into impairment, right? So this is the stage of SICR first, where the borrower undergoes a significant increase in credit risk, and over here this is your impairment. The impairment. So this is next 12 months, and this is the lifetime, right? So this is the lifetime. So on one hand we have the next 12 months losses, on the other hand what we have is the lifetime period, right? So obviously one thing you can clearly see is that the lifetime PD that we estimate, right, the lifetime probability of default, is obviously a more conservative method of the measure of measuring expected credit losses, right? So given that it's a more conservative measure, it's a more conservative so so this lifetime measure or lifetime PD is a more conservative measure of the next 12 months, or of the probability of default, right? Similarly of the expected credit loss and so on. So the next question that comes out to us is that what is this lifetime default? How do I define the lifetime of a of an account, right? So if I say that okay, there is an account, right, and what is and I want to understand that okay, what is its lifetime? So first of all, to define the concept of a lifetime PD, I need to define the lifetime of a borrower. So how do you think can we define the lifetime of a borrower? So lifetime of an account, right? So that is what we need to define first. So how do we define the
So,
lifetime of an account? Yes,
so is lifetime not equal to the tenure for which the loan has been taken?
correct. The lifetime of an account is the total duration for which the entire loan has been taken, right? So this is where, so the question that comes out is yes, this is the total duration of the loan. Now, the duration of the loan may not always be same as the lifetime. when is this possible? So the duration, mostly it is equal to the duration of the loan, as you have correctly pointed out, Anshul, but there are certain cases where you may not be having lifetime equal to duration. When is it possible? This is possible if your loan has a deferral, or the credit that you have taken has a deferral period, right? So, if the loan that you have taken has a deferral period, then duration plus the deferral is your lifetime of the, right? So the duration plus the deferral is the lifetime of your loan. Oh, okay, fine. So over here, yeah. So the question that comes out over here is, so then what is a deferral period, and how is a product which is structured, or how is it that a product is structured with a deferral period, right? Uh, so how do you think would this actually work? So what type of products can have a deferral period? Or what is a deferral period? Any idea? Yes. So what are the situations where we can see, uh, the cases of a deferral period? What is a deferral period first of all? cards. Okay. No, credit cards do not have a deferral period as such. See, basically, let's say there is a loan product, right, where the terms are such that you take the loan today, right, and you did not pay it right now. What you do is you pay, or you start paying it 3 months down the line, or you start paying it 6 months down the line, or 9 months down the line. So these are kind of buy now, pay later products, right? And these are generally done to increase the sales, and this kind of finance, or these kind of products are found at the point of sales finance, right? Let's say you go to buy a refrigerator, right? When you apply for a BNPL kind of a product, right? So when you apply for a BNPL kind of a product, or you kind of defer a product with a deferral period, so then your total maturity, or your total lifetime, becomes equal to the duration of the loan, that's 12 months, plus the 3 months deferral that you get to start your payment, right? But generally for products like personal loans or mortgages, the deferral period is zero, or it's set to zero. Now, when you set it to zero, then what you get is a normal lending products, and that is where your total lifetime becomes equal to your total duration of the loan, right? So the day you are onboarded, you complete your term and you leave the books of the bank. So that entire period is something what we call the so that is the period that we call your what should I say? So that's the period that we call your your lifetime of the borrower, right? So is the idea of this deferral period clear to us? Now, in credit cards, the period that we get, that is not typically a deferral period, right? It's not that you start paying after that. You need to pay within that. So that's why it's not a deferral period. It's called a grace period, right? Fine. So now the lifetime of a loan. So you need to. So while you compute the next 12 months probability of default, you also need to compute the lifetime probability of default. So the question that comes out is that how do we estimate the lifetime of a default, of a lifetime of a loan? Right? So over here, if you think about this, so let me say that okay, I gave a loan to Anshu, right? And I know that. So from to the day he starts paying his EMIs, every month what I do is I run a program which tells me what are his chances of surviving through the next uh, 40 say the next 35 months, through the next 34 months, next 33 months, like this, right? So the problem of lifetime PD, of estimating lifetime PD, is that of a problem of survival, and that is where the concepts of survival analysis becomes very important. So what is the probability that this borrower will not be there in the next 12 months? What is the probability of survival in the next T plus kth period, given that the borrower is present in the books of the bank today? So what is the probability of default in T plus kth period, given that the borrower has not defaulted today? Right? So that is precisely what. So if you can answer this question, you can easily bring out the concept of survival analysis, or we can actually estimate the problem of the survival of the borrower in the next T plus K period, right? So this is where to estimate the lifetime of a loan, the lifetime of a loan, right? The concept of survival analysis comes into play. The concept of survival comes into play, right? So that's where, so over here, this concept of survival analysis, so this is a new method that we got to understand theoretically as well as its implementation in SAS when we talk about lifetime period. Okay, so before I move into this, let me just repeat what or explain this all over once again. Let's say there is an account A, account to whom I have given a loan for 3 years, so that is 36 months. So after the borrower has completed first month, right? So what I'm trying to find out is that what is the probability of this borrower to survive in the next T plus 35 months. The next is so in the second month of his tenure with the bank, I'll run this module to find out what is his probability of survival in the next 34 months, right? Also, when I'm trying to, if I'm to find out my lifetime PD, what I'm trying to find out is that what is the probability of the borrower to default in the next T plus 12 period, right, or in the next some T plus K period, given that he is not a defaulter as of now. So as at time T, right, he's not a defaulter. So what are his probability to what are his probabilities to default in the forward looking period T plus K, given that he is not a guy who has defaulted as on the TH period. So that's where I'm trying to assess his chances or his conditional chances of survival, right? And that is where, to assess the lifetime probabilities, right? The lifetime probability of default of a borrower, we would require understanding of the methods of survival analysis, right?
What if a customer leaves the
Hello.
what if the customer leaves the bank?
See, when the customer leaves the bank, right, so that means his loan is cleared, right? So he has paid back his dues and he is leaving. Now, if he leaves before doing that, then the following are the possibilities. Number one, either he is a deceased borrower. Number two, he is a return of borrower. And so if he's written off, it obviously means he's a defaulter, right? And number three is like he is a fraud or a bankrupt. Now, under each of these cases, right, whether it's a fraud bankruptcy case, then he is kind of flagged as a bad borrower. On the other hand, if he's a deceased borrower, right, then the account is actually excluded from the books of the bank, right? So this is how that account would be treated if he leaves in between the process. Now, if he is a deceased borrower, I cannot do anything about that. So, when I'm trying to predict that whether he is surviving after TH period of time in the books of the bank, right? I would what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to base stand today, conditioned on the information that I have today. I'm trying to frame a prediction over the remaining T minus K period, right? So, say I'm standing on the kth time period of his vintage with the book on the with the bank, right? Now, standing at the kth period, I'm trying to understand that what are his chances, what are his odds of surviving the remaining T minus K period. So that's what I'm trying to do. Now, if he leaves in between because he's been a fraud or a bankrupt borrower, that is something which my survival model cannot capture, right? So over here, survival analysis becomes a very important factor. right? So this is precisely how this thing should actually work. Okay, now having talked about the lifetime BD, so in the lifetime BD, what I'm trying to find out is that okay, given that this borrower and over here is standing today, so what are the possible criteria? What are the possible characteristics over here that I have? Or what are the chances that this borrower will default in the remaining vintage?
Tanmay, again a question here.
Uh,
So let's say we have a record, or so for survival analysis, we require some of the accounts who have actually completed the maturity and some are close to maturity.
Right.
Like let's say
Hmm.
if the tenure is of 20 years
Mhm.
so then they have almost completed 20 to 20 years, 15 years, or 10 years.
Correct.
Is that right?
Right.
So, but we won't be having this data, let's say, in this IFRS 9.
Sorry, I didn't get your question.
So for survival analysis, we need to do an analysis based on accounts which have completed their full maturity cycle.
No,
Is
so
it right?
no. Obviously, we'll have accounts who are still in the process of completing their full maturity cycle, right? So if they already have completed their cycles, right, then they are all close accounts. So obviously, yes, I will have some accounts who are in the process of completing when I'm looking into retrospect, right? So that I can actually backtest my data. But also when I'm developing, when I'm implementing that, I'm implementing it on a set of models which are still in the process of their payments. Because if they've completed their payments, then I don't need them. I mean, I don't need to predict their probability of survival. I'll be predicting the probability of survival for the set of accounts which are still in the process of repaying their loans, right? And that is where I need to understand that okay, given that this guy has undergone a credit deterioration, now this concern only comes in once the guy has undergone a credit deterioration, right? So if the guy has not undergone a credit deterioration, lifetime loss is not required. So basically, for the set of people who have undergone a credit deterioration, what I want to know is that given that they have undergone a credit deterioration, given that they are delinquent today, what is the probability that they would be surviving the next P plus K period or looking into the following J period. So that is what I'm trying to predict in the survival model. Is it clear, Anshu, or do you have any other questions?
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay. So, in any other questions around this? So you have understood the perspective, right? So when is it that we are doing a lifetime BD, right? And what exactly is the problem that the lifetime BD is trying to address? So how to do survival analysis is something that we will talk about later. I'm not going into that right now, right? So what I want to know is, I mean, are you clear about this idea?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay, fine. So, so this is what lifetime ECL is, right? So we'll talk about more about survival analysis separately when we take up the discussion on the statistical portion. So now that's now again survival analysis. The survival PD generates the lifetime PD, which is again calibrated to macroeconomic variables. And once it is calibrated to macroeconomic variables, the lifetime PD makes or becomes forward looking in nature. Right? So that is something that is there. So now, so having talked about PD, right? So we now have the idea about the probability of default, right? We now understand that okay, this is what the probability of default of the borrower is, and depending on whether he has undergone an SICR or not, we would compute the next 12 months PD, which is a forward-looking measure because it has been adjusted to maximum of variables, and so does the lifetime PD. Makes sense. So does the lifetime PD. So is the lifetime PD a forward-looking measure. So now the next part that we all talk about over here is the next part that we all talk about over here is okay. So the next that we'll talk about is LGD. Now LGD is something which is something very typical. It's a very sought after kind of model, right? So whenever you go to any interviews, they ask you questions like, okay, have you developed an LGD model? So that's fine. So basically, we'll talk about these two components today. Now, LGD and EAD are the components of loss. Now, they help you identify they help you quantify the extent of loss that is about to happen, right? So basically, while probability of default gives you an idea about, like so it gives you an idea about the you know, gives you an idea about how this lifetime PD. I mean, it gives us an idea about exactly how the borrower may default. LGD and EAD gives us an idea about the loss that may occur once these accounts starts defaulting. So over here, the loss given default that we talk about always is what? So it is the loss which happens as a part of the default, and this loss is estimated as a fraction or as a ratio of the exposure at default. So EAD is the exposure which is or the exposure at default which is outstanding as on as on a given reporting date, right? So it's the exposure which is outstanding. Now this exposure at default is that okay, as on a given date if an account defaults, what is the outstanding exposure that we have? So that is where loss divided by EAD comes into play. So LGD or the loss given default is loss divided by EAD, right? So obviously when we are trying to understand the law LGD, right? So first of all, before we try to understand LGD, the first thing that we need to do is we need to try to understand the EAD first. Then we try to understand how does loss occur from an EAD, and then we try to understand LGD, right? So first of all, we start talking about EAD. From EAD, how is it that you go into loss, and from that loss, how do you compute that LGD? Something that we will be discussing in this session. Right. So first of all, the question that comes out is what is EAD or the exposure at default. Now, the exposure at default has two different kind has a it has a different kind of a definition. If uh, if the variable is a closed-end product, that's a term loan product. So if I have a term loan, and the definition of EAD is different. If I have a revolving, if I have a revolving product like a credit card, right? So if I have a okay, so over here what we have is we have the credit card. Right. So first of all, what we'll talk about is that how is it that exposure at default is different for these two kind of products. So how is it that when you talk about exposure at default, how is the exposure at default for a term loan different from the exposure at default for a credit card? So this is one important part. So we'll talk about exposure at default. We'll talk about term loan, credit cards, and from there we'll talk about how we enter into loss and hence to the LGB. Right. So just go through this for a minute, and I'll just be back, and we'll get started. Just give me a minute. Okay, so before I just go, okay, so over here, Piyush is a question that is it due to secured versus unsecured product? No, Piyush is not because of only secured versus unsecured product, but it is because of revolving versus non-revolving products. Because credit card products are open-ended products, right? So that's what. So that's why it's not difficult to compute the lifetime value. Because let's say I want to compute a lifetime EAD or I want to compute a lifetime PD. How do I do it for a credit card? It doesn't have any maturity, and lifetime, as we had defined, was based on maturity. So so that so the exposure over there, the EAD over there, NCD over there needs to be computed in a different manner, right? And that is what we are trying to understand over here, right? Okay, just give me a minute. I'll just be back and we'll get started. Okay, so as I was saying, so let's start off our discussion with the concepts of EAD. Okay, so before I talk about EAD, so, so what is your understanding of exposure at default? What do you think is exposure at default? So Mrinmoy has a point over here. What is the amount left that is exposed? Okay. Okay. What else? Mrinmoy, that's very close. It's really very close. Whatever you have said, it's like 80% correct. There are a few things missing in there. We just need to build that part up. Yes, Piyush, I'm sure. What do you think? Okay, so exposure at default is as Wilmot rightly said. So it's an estimate of the amount, you know, that would go into that the account would be exposed to if it were to go into default in the forward looking in a certain forward looking time frame, right? So over here, let's think about it this way. So let's say I am standing here today, right? And I am a non-defaulter, right? Now, what in an EAD model, what I generally try to do is I try to find out that. So what I try to do is I try to find out that okay, if in the next 12 months, if I were to go into default or if this account was to go into default, what is the expected amount that would be outstanding, right? So this is where this particular part comes in. So let's say I'm standing here today. So today is the 10th of Feb. I want to know that if I were to default in the next 12 months, what would be the expected amount which is outstanding. So that is precisely what is an exposure at default, right? So it's purely an estimated figure, right? Because when you're calculating this estimate, right, the account has still not been in a position or has still not kind of defaulted, right? So it is still in a position where it is operating in the books of the bank. But what I want to know is if it were to default in the next 12 months, how would it be like, right? So that is something that we need to examine over here. So over here, the you know the trick with exposure at default is that when I'm trying to define the exposure at default, I am trying to look into only the drawn balance or the balance or the observed balance. So I'm starting with an observed balance, and from there I'm trying to compute my EAD figures, right? So I'm trying with an observed balance. Now, when I try with an observed balance, the question that comes out is that the observed balance is a drawn balance or it's a uh, it's a drawn balance, right? Now, for a term loan product, right, all the balances that we generally get to see, they are all drawn balances. Let's say I ask for, so let's say the bank grants me a loan of 10 lakh rupees today, right? So then, and I keep on at the end of 2 years, I have paid back say 2 lakhs, right? So it means the outstanding amount that I have with me as on the beginning of the third year is 8 lakhs. So this is precisely what is there, right? Now the question that comes out is that so there is no undrawn or any kind of shadow component over here. However, for products like a credit card, right, you have two types of commitments. One is a drawn commitment, so where you see that your your account or the particular borrower with whom you're being who is given the loan or the credit card had drawn out a certain amount, whereas it is some amount which is undrawn. Let's say the total balance on the card is 1 lakh. Right? Now, out of this 1 lakh, 60,000 is drawn, right? The remaining 40,000 is not drawn. So, therefore, the challenge of computing EAD for a revolving product is much more than computing it for a closed-ended product. And the reason is that there is always a shadow or an undrawn limb balance which is there along with it. right? So over here, the next thing that we need to know is, or the next thing that we want to do over here is the following. Yeah. So over here, so when we are talking about the exposure at default, right? So for a credit card, we need to take into account both the drawn and the undrawn balances, because before defaulting, the guy may pull down the remaining balance and then he may go into default. So the total exposure of the bank is both from the undrawn and the drawn balance. And the second challenge with the revolving products like credit cards is that these products do not have any maturity time period, right? So this is what the so this is why, right, a very an important concept for EAD becomes the credit conversion factor. The credit conversion factor.
So Tanmay, and the credit
Yeah.
conversion factor is only applicable to credit card type
Right.
of product and not to mortgages. In mortgages, this value is zero, or
Yeah.
in mortgages, let's say the EAD is calculated directly from the books.
Yeah. So basically, when let's say I have a credit portfolio, right? I have a portfolio where there are both, so which contains personal loans as well as credit cards. Right? So now what we'll do is, for credit cards, the conversion factor would be greater than zero. For the others, it would be set to zero. Now again, depending on the way mortgage products are, the product is defined. Now, mortgage products can be defined, can be designed such that they are, uh, you know so what happens over here is that for products which do not have a credit conversion factor, right? So let's go for term loan products, the CCF is set to zero, whereas for retail credit cards and all, it is set to, it is greater than zero. For mortgage, it depends on the way the product is designed. In some cases, mortgage is designed as a term loan product, whereas in some other cases, the mortgage is designed as a revolver product. Let's say you are apply for a loan of 80 lakhs, right? So what they do is they create a revolving balance account for you with 80 lakhs as the limit, right? So what you do is you draw that amount. So you may or may use that entire amount at one go, or what you can do is you can keep on drawing some amounts on that and keep on paying it back within some periods of time, and you can keep on using that 80 lakhs up to a period of time. So in such a case, if it is structured as a revolving product, then uh, like the HELOC products as they call it, right? That the revolving, it's called a line of credit, something like that. So it's a revolving mortgage loan. I don't remember the full form of HELOC. I'll just check and will tell you. Okay. A home equity line of credit is a loan in which the lender will lend a maximum amount with an aggregate period where the collateral is the borrower's equity in his or her house. So in HELOC loans, what happens is that it's a line of credit loan, right? So it's a kind of a revolving loan, right? Uh, but the only difference between the HELOC and the credit card would be that HELOC is a collateralized loan, right? So basically, you have so what you have is you have so basically you are a lender. Uh, it, you know, so you can actually use that revolving facility up to a given point of time, right? But it's a revolving loan by nature. But it's not that you can use that indefinitely. So there is a time up to which you can use that facility and you can keep paying back that over a period of time, right? So there are these kind of so there are these different kind of loans which are there. So, in Australia, I have heard people design this mortgage loans as a, so people design these mortgage loans as what should I say? Uh, so they design these mortgages as, as a revolving product per se, right? So there are these different kind of things which are there. So,
So in case,
yeah.
yeah, so in case where we do not have a CCF calculation required for a particular portfolio,
Yes, the
so
CCF
in
will
that
be
case the PD,
flagged as zero.
yeah, so
Uh-huh.
in the portfolio wherein we are flagging CCF as a zero,
Uh-huh.
so in that case the LGD would be equal to EAD.
No, out of this exposure, how much has actually gone into loss? That will be your loss given default, right? So your loss given default is the amount that has gone into loss, that's the gross charge off, adjusted to the recovery is your LGD.
So EAD is something which wherein the recovery recovery is not adjusted, right?
No, no, it's the exposure, right? So if I go to
So
default in the next 12 months or in the next T plus K time period, this is the exposure that I have.
exposure is in terms of percentage or
No,
probability,
EAD is a dollar variable.
and so is this LGD.
No, LGD will be a fractional variable. LGD is
Okay.
loss divided by EAD, right? So loss is a subpart of EAD. So that means the LGD is a fraction of that, or it's always a fraction of the EAD, right? So LGD will always be a percentage. Like PD is a
So
percent,
PD, so like PD and LGD is a percentage value or a probability value, and then EAD is a
is a
dollar,
dollar
like the
value. So when you multiply the two
numerical
together,
value.
yeah. So that's the reason why So to get the expected loss, it's enough to multiply PD into LGD, right? But to get it in the dollar terms, what we do is we multiply the exposure at default with
Okay, okay.
it, right? To get the loss, expected loss as a dollar value, we use this. So loss by EAD. So LGD gives you the loss given default as a percentage that is multiplied with PD, right? Into whatever we have. Clear? So you multiply the
Yes.
EL value with the EAD to get it in dollar terms. So without that dollar term, that EL value would have been a fraction number, right? Piyush, Mrinmoy, Anshul, all clear?
Yes, Tanmay.
Perfect.
So, Tanmay, just
Yeah.
one question. For example, credit card is a revolving product. So,
Mhm.
this CCA will be applicable to overdrafts as well, current account?
Yes, yes, it would be available to, it would be applicable to overdraft as well.
Okay.
So any kind of revolving products that you have and you want to compute the exposure at default, So there you are bringing in this CCF.
And this term loan can be personal loan and like mortgage
Huh?
can be.
Huh, 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 huh. So your mortgage is a secured loan, right? It's a collateralized product. Whereas a personal loan is a term loan. But so both of them are term loans, but personal loan is unsecured, whereas the mortgage is secured.
Okay.
So Tanmay, another question here is,
Uh-huh.
the uh, IRB approach and there were two approaches, internal advanced and
Uh-huh.
basic.
Uh-huh.
So only advanced one requires the banks to calculate the LGD and EAD. Otherwise, in previous two
Correct. So
approaches,
otherwise they are given, so the
they are
EAD is
calculating the PD
computed from
only
the
and
bank,
then yeah.
right? The EAD is computed by the bank. Otherwise, LGD and PD figures are externally given, and you can compute your PDA with EAD. So that's the
So
standardized approach.
these values, so these were yeah, standardized approach. Sorry. So standardized approach, the RBI provides this to a normal bank which is under the RBI.
No, not really the RBI. So yes, so basically, if you are
Corporate.
using these weights and whatever risk weights you are using, and that has to be like uh, so basically, the ratings. So basically, I'll be using an external rating, right? So there is Moody's rating, Fitch rating, and so the Moody,
So
Fitch,
that
and
is advanced.
S&P. Yeah. So
So
these are
that
the,
is standard approach.
yeah, that's a standard approach. So in the standard
Wherein
approach,
we define the asset classes, wherein we define the asset
correct,
classes and we assign weightage
the
accordingly to
risk
that.
weight directly, right, 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 right.
Yeah. So, but in advanced approach, we have two subsets. One is
Yeah, so
internal
the
rating
internal
based, and the
rating based
other is
approach and the advanced internal rating based approach. So the one that we are talking about over here is the AIRB approach. That's the advanced internal rating based approach.
so in that we require PD, LGD, and EAD calculation within a bank internally.
Right. So that's for the AIRB, advanced internal rating based approach.
And what is the contrast for AIRB?
Sorry,
So
I missed.
IRB has. So what is the contrast to AIRB? So under IRB there are two. One is AIRB and the other one is I just forgot the name, but that requires only PD calculation within the bank
Yeah,
internally.
so that's your internal rating based approach, right? So
Yeah.
within
So
the
in that
IRB,
case, who provides the LGD and EAD values?
so EAD comes from the bank within itself, right? So based on your exposure, you can always compute the EAD, right? Now Now over there, the LGD is given extra. I think it's 45% or something like that. It's taken like this, right? So ultimately, what you have is you have the PD developed by the bank and the PD estimate from the bank. Right. So these two are put together to get the EAD multiplied by the EAD. So basically, in a internal rating based approach, what you do is in the advanced internal rating based approach, PDLGD EAD are developed internally. Now, in the internal rating based approach, what we do is we develop the PD models. The EAD is there, which is obtained from the exposures, and the LGD is placed at 45%. Right?
Yeah, right.
So, does that answer your question, Anshu?
Yeah, yeah, it does.
Okay, great. Fine. Okay. So talking about this EAD, yeah. So talking about exposure at default and credit conversion factors. So while we are talking about the credit conversion factors, right? The credit conversion factor is applicable for credit cards or for revolving products. So what is this credit conversion factor? So I just need the definition of the credit conversion factor. Okay. So basically CCF. So if you look into EAD, so EAD is the drawn balance plus CCF into undrawn balance into undrawn balance. So basically what we have is EAD is equal to drawn plus the CCF into undrawn balance, right? So obviously if I just change the sides, you can see that EAD minus drawn divided by the undrawn balance is your CCF. So that's the CCF definition. So in order to estimate the EAD, right? So what we generally do is we first of all create the dependent variable as CCF, right? We estimate that CCF, right? And once we have estimated that CCF, so based on that estimate, what we do is we define whether the so based on that CCF estimate, what we do is we kind of use that CCF as the dependent variable, and then we try to predict that CCF, right? So that CCF that we are talking about over here can be used as the dependent variable for the the revolving products, right? So the CCF is nothing but the observed exposure at default, right? Minus the drawn balance divided by the undrawn balance. The undrawn balance is your headroom. EAD minus drawn by the headroom. So this is your CCF, right? So once you have the observed CCF values, then based on the variables, what you can do is you can predict the estimated CCF. Once you have that estimated CCF, now so for those populations for whom you do not have the EAD, what you do is you just put in that estimated CCF. You have the drawn balance, you have the undrawn balance, and you run that. So from there, what you get is EAD minus drawn by headroom, that is equal to your CCF. And once you have that CCF and you predict that, that is where you get your EAD, right? So this is for this EAD is for your revolving products. Now for the non-revolving products, your EAD is very much your outstanding balance, right? So basically, say if at the time of default my balance was 10,000 rupees, if the EAD is obviously 10,000 for a term product like a term loan and so on. Now, what is the objective of using this CCF for revolving products? The idea is to incorporate both the on balance sheet and the off balance sheet items, on balance sheet values into one single formula, right? Right. So with CCA, what we do is we generally bring in both the on balance sheet and the off balance sheet items, right? And otherwise, if it's term loans, then EAD is simply the amount outstanding as at the time of default, right? So now,
Then
yeah.
one question
Hmm.
regarding for like credit card or the revolving products, we include the uh, on the balance sheet and the off balance sheet, both the products you're saying, I mean the items.
Sorry, I did not get that.
Oh, No, what I was saying is for revolving products, do we include both the
Yeah. So
off and on balance
see.
item?
What is the on balance sheet item? The on balance sheet item is the balance, right? Which you have
Mm-hmm.
drawn. Now, what is the off balance sheet item? Which is there but does not appear on the balance sheet, right? So your undrawn balance is very much there. That's very much a part of the bank's exposure, but
Mm-hmm.
it is not appearing in the balance sheet. Why is it not appearing in the balance sheet? It is not appearing in the balance sheet because it is not drawn,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that is why you need to incorporate that.
Correct.
Otherwise, the exposure that you would estimate would be underestimated. Clear?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is as far as EAD is concerned. Now the next question is, let's say I am standing at a snapshot one, right? At a snapshot. Now, what type of accounts would enter into my EAD data? I'm standing as on a snapshot month, right? And I want to create my and what I want to do is I want to create uh, you know so I want to create uh, the data for the performance data for my EAD model, right? What type of accounts would enter into my modeling data? What type of accounts? Okay, so Mrinmoy says only active accounts. Okay, fine. So what should be the performance flags of those active accounts? Okay, 12 months of performance. Yeah, but what should be the performance flags of the accounts? So basically, if Mrinmoy is correct, we will look into, say, we will look into 12 months of performance, right? Now, what I want to know is that what are the accounts? So what would be the what is it that I'm trying to address over here? Accounts which default in the next 12 months, right? What would be their estimated exposure? So I need to take accounts which are active as on the snapshot month, right? So these are accounts which are active as of the snapshot month and defaulting in the performance. So basically, the data set for EAD, the modeling data for EAD that you have, right, is a subset of the data set that you had for PD. For PD data, when we did the performance model, right, we use those accounts which are active and current as on the books of the bank, and in the performance they may or may not have defaulted because you are trying to estimate their chances of defaulting. That's why you took both accounts, both the type of accounts which defaulted and which did not default in the performance, right? For the EAD model, you are choosing those set of accounts which are current and active as on the snapshot, right? And not defaulted in the next 12 months, right? So accounts which are there and which have not defaulted in the, I mean accounts which are active and current as on the book of the bank as on that month, and accounts which have defaulted in the next 12 months, right? So over there what we have is we have, so basically when you are trying to develop an EAD model, once again your modeling snapshot data contains a set of accounts which are not defaulted as on the snapshot but defaulted in the performance, right? So over here, so is the idea of the EAD data set clear to us? So for a PD model, as on a snapshot, I'm considering all accounts which are active as on the snapshot and may or may not default in the performance, right? Whereas for the EAD model, I am choosing those set of accounts which are active as on the snapshot and defaults in the performance. So the EAD data set or the EAD modeling data will always be a subset of the PD modeling data, right?
Tanmay, what do we mean by that? Does that mean that data set for the data set we use to develop a PD and LGD model would be different, or it would be a subset from the data set which we have used for PD calculation?
Yeah, so the data that you use for PD model development, right? So the subset of the data is the EAD data. So in PD data, as on a snapshot, you have the set of all the active accounts, right? And those accounts in the next 12 months performance are either defaulting or non-defaulting, right? So you have both set of accounts because you want to find out the probability of default. Now, when you are trying to
Yeah.
find out the exposure at default, what are you considering on? You are considering your analysis on those accounts which are current, which were current as of the
Active.
snapshot, but have defaulted in the 12 months performance. Only then will you get their exposures, right? At default. So what you do is,
So
so
yeah,
from that PD data, you filter out those accounts which were uh, which had the next 12 months flagged
default.
as one, right?
Default. So is this a law that every time we'll use the data set for EAD, which is subset of PD, or is it sometimes that we use some other data as well?
No, no. So it's just a thumb rule. So see, EAD data is just a subset of the PD data. So that's the
Yeah. So
fundamental.
every time this.
So when
Okay.
you,
Okay.
the moment you prepare your
Fundamental.
data, right, you have your PD and your PD flags, then you have your EAD flags, right? So when you merge that, say when you want to find out that, okay, out of the, what is the data for whom I want to develop an EAD data. Now I need those data, the data points for whom I have the exposure. I need the observed EAD, right? Now I'll get the observed EAD only for which accounts? I'll get the observed EAD only for the, sorry, I'll get observed EAD only for the defaulted accounts, right? Accounts which were current as on the snapshot but defaulted in the performance. So I filter that account. Right? So is this part clear to us? Perfect. Perfect. So any other questions up to this EAD? Okay, fine. So having discussed EAD, right? So now EAD gives you the exposure at default, right? Now the next question that comes out over here is the following. So over here, the next thing that we would like to do over here is the following. Let's say, uh, so let's think about it this way. So so now we have looked into PD, right? We have looked into EAD. So when I talk about EAD, we have looked into the basics of EAD. We'll go ahead and we'll talk about the model development side or the intricacies of model development of PD, LGD, EAD later, right? We'll come to that. So over here, let's have after I've explained the EAD. So EAD gives you the exposure that the bank that the borrower will have at default, right? Now after this, the next part that we need to look into is the following. That uh, so now after the borrower defaults, right? This is the exposure that is there, and now a recovery process initiates, right? So now after the recovery process is done, right, the amount that cannot be recovered is the loss, right? So the loss is the net charge off or the unrecovered amount is unrecovered exposure. So that is the unrecovered exposure, right? So now, when once we have this unrecovered exposure, right? So the question that comes up to us is that how do we do this? So how do we estimate this loss, right? Now this loss is a fraction of the EAD. So that loss as a fraction of the EAD is my loss given default. And therefore, to calculate this loss, I need to have two things. One, I need behavior to predict this loss. I need to have the the behavioral information on defaults, right? I have the behavioral information on defaults. So how is it that the the you know how is it that the defaulters are kind of so how is it they behave, what are their characteristics, and so on. The behavioral information of defaulters right? So behavioral information of defaulters, and what I have over here is the second information that I need to have is on the recovery. Is on the recovery. So one is the behavioral information of default, the other is recovery. So so now my objective is to predict that what is the maximum possible recovery that I can do on an account, right? And once I have an understanding of that recovery, the next thing that we'll try to do over here is we'll try to say that okay, fine, we have a recovery on an account, right? So we have the recovery on an account, and so from there what we will do is, so 1 minus the recovery rate will be my will be my loss given default, right? So over here, so if I want to find out this LGD, what is the amount of the loss given default? So that is 1 minus the recovery rate. So my objective over here is to predict this recovery rate. So now the question that comes out is that what do we mean by this recovery? Now by recovery, I mean a lot of different things. So I mean I do not mean a lot of different things, but what does recovery mean over here? So what is recovery? So basically, when once I have actually given this thing, so once I have actually given this, right? So or once I've given out this recovery, once I've talked about so once I've given the loan, right, and it has defaulted. Now based on those defaults, I need to find out that how is it that the recovery is like how much of it is recovered over a period of time. But a typical recovery process would take 3 to 4 years, right? But what I need to do is I need to predict it for the next year, for the next 12 months. What is the extent of recovery that can be done? So I know that the recovery happens over a period of time. Let's say the total amount recovered is 80% of the total amount is recovered, but that happens over a 4 years time. So I need to find out that the 12 months equivalent of that 80% recovery in the next 12 months. And that is where, the role of discounting in the recovery comes in, and the role of the net present value comes in. So, in order to understand this concept associated with LGD, right, two very important concepts are: number one is the net present value. Is the net present value. Is so basically what we want to do over here is the net present value, right? So that's one very important part. The next part that we have over here is, after the net present value, we'll talk about the discount rate. Now, these two concepts are very critical for your LGD, for defining the observed values of the recovery. Right. So once you have that observed recovery series, right, then what you do is you go ahead and you can model this LGD and whatever the series are. So over here, what we have is the discount rate. Right. So I have the net present value and I have the the discount rate. Now I need the net
Can
present
you
value because
can,
yeah,
could you please explain net present value and the discount rate once again? I'm not clear about
yeah. I did not explain discount rate. I'm coming to that. So
it.
in
Okay.
net present value, what we do is, so in net present value, what we do is, see, I know that typically, let's say, I know that for a credit card, so whatever loan is given, whatever the exposure default is, I know that typically I can recover around 80% of that, right? But I do that recovery in a period of 4 years, right? But when I'm predicting my LGD, or when I'm calculating my LGD in the next 12 months, what am I doing? So I need to find out that 80% recovery which happens over a period of 4 years. What is that 12-month equivalent of that 80% recovery, right? And that is where you are computing the net present value. So the net present value occurs. It's an element of discounting. Now, what is discounting? Discounting is to account for time inconsistencies, right? Let's say that you want a job, right? Or you want to move into a different job profile. Let's say you want to move into IFRS 9 model development. So you go and tell your boss about that. Okay, look, hey, I want to move into IFRS 9 model development. I don't want to work in my present profile, and for which I'm doing an IFRS 9 learning session and all these things, right? And you expect that, okay, in the span of 4 years, I will get, I'll be getting around 40 lakhs per annum, let's say. So what your manager tells you is, ki, look, you are getting 10 per annum right now. So in the 4 years or 5 years period of time, you'll get around the 30, 35 lakh per annum. So why don't you strike a deal now that you don't change your domain, and I will give you 16 lakhs per annum this year, right? So what is your boss doing? Your boss is actually offering you a discounted value of that 35 lakhs today. So what he's trying to offer you is something equivalent of the 35 lakhs today to retain you back over here. So there is an element of patience, right? Or you see that, okay, now I'll have to do these sessions every weekend. I'll have to go through all these topics. I have to learn all these things, and then what I'll do is I need to go and get that job and then work over there, gain that experience, go to 35 lakhs per annum. So there is a lot of effort and patience involved in that. So now assuming that you are an impatient guy, what you do is you offer this, you accept this offer of 16 lakh and you stand here today, which would grow over a period of time to somewhere around, so something at a certain rate in the next 4 years. So so discounting is to offer you or is to take into account, is to take the time inconsistencies into account, right? So the entire idea over here is to take into account those time inconsistencies. So therefore, this part is something that we need to take care of.
So in this case, for example, if it's a like collateralized product, so
Uh-huh.
we will also consider the amount that has been paid for collateralization plus the amount which has already been paid by the customer,
Correct.
right?
So if it's a collateral product, then again there is a net present value of sales,
Mhm.
right? So then again there is a net present value of sales, because if I default today, you have to retain that collateral for some time. You have to take the possession of that, then you have to kind of put it into auction, and then you need to sell it off. So there again is a net present value concept coming in, because there's a time lag between the point of time when you're getting the collateral and you are selling
Mhm.
it off to make the recovery. Now it may happen that when you took the collaterals, right? So what happened in 2008? So they took the house collaterals, but for the time when they took and when they were selling, the house prices had slid off very badly. So the recovery was never made, and hence the banks made such a huge amount of loss, right? So even for
Mhm.
collateral products, there is a concept of the net present value and inconsistencies over across time periods,
Okay.
right? Okay, so till now, what we have done is we have introduced the concept of, we talked about PD, we talked about lifetime PD, we talked about EAD, and we talked about LGD. Right, so we have introduced all the required concepts over here required for model development. Next stage is to take up each of them and understand how they are literally modeled statistically. What are the statistical methods of dev modeling each of these approaches, right? And then we'll gradually move to start using it on the data sets. And while we go through it, we'll go across other requirements which are required for getting an IFRS 9 compliant ECL and ECL approach. Right? So that's something which we'll take up the discussions in the next class. So let's take a pause here for the day, right? And uh, let's so I'll share the recordings with you. I have converted it already. I'll upload it now on the drive, right? So you can access it from tomorrow onwards, your IFRS 9 recordings, and from there we will kind of take it.
Yeah. So Tanmay, before we
Uh-huh.
close, I just have few basic questions
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
that can be taken up quickly.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
So yeah, so the first thing is that when we talk of IFRS 9, we talk of IFRS 9 reporting, we
Uh-huh.
talk of IFRS 9 impairment modeling, we talk of IFRS 9 uh, provisioning. So how are all these three different from each other?
See, they are not different from each other. These are just three separate functionalities, right? So you
Okay,
have a ECL model which is at the back end, right? And every month
yeah,
when you run that ECL figure by your products, by your industry, by your by your stages, right? And you collate them in a report from that's the IFRS 9 reporting, and
okay,
right. And the
yeah,
third one that you said is IFRS 9.
impairment modeling.
So the model is the impairment modeling that you are doing, and to model that
So that
impairment, these are the
Yeah.
feeder models which are going into it. Because once all these feeder models go into it, and you know that your feeder models are working fine, then the output that you get, that's your impairment model.
Okay. So that ECL, the model which we developed to calculate the ECL is the impairment modeling.
Yeah, that's the impairment. So the ECL is an unbiased estimate of the impairment.
ECL is an unbiased import. Okay. And provisioning is something we calculate from the report which we have generated from
Yeah,
IFRS
so
9
so
reporting.
so this ECL, the expected credit loss that you get, that is so a provision. So that's the provision, right? So that's the provision that you need to keep aside against your expected credit losses and your impair. So on against stage three, you will keep the 100% amount because those are already impaired, right? Now the balances which would flow down to impairment in the next few months, or against them, you are also keeping aside this impairment.
Okay, okay. So the other thing is that the jobs which are being posted on the job portals are different for IFRS 9 reporting and different for IFRS
Huh?
9 ECL modeling, impairment modeling.
So that would be different. They would be two different job profiles, right?
Oh, okay, okay. And initially we talked about that there is a role of time series modeling
Uh-huh.
into the IFRS 9.
Uh-huh.
So where do we find the relevance of time series modeling in this
So when
IFRS
we are
9
pulling in
modeling?
the macroeconomic variables, when we are pulling in the macroeconomic variables, when we are selecting the macroeconomic variables, or let's say in this Z approach that we are developing over here, right? The Z method.
Yeah.
So we are predicting the next 12 months ka say GDP or the next 12 months ka unemployment. So that can be done using simple extrapolation approach or moving average or with time series. So time series is technically a more sound method to do that, right? So even
So
when
yeah.
given three or four time series variable, when I'm choosing upon that, okay, which two are the ones, that's where we look into time series characteristics like co-integration. We look into time series characteristics like co-integration, then the causality, NZ using NZ causality. So that's the part where time series models will come in.
So we'll be discussing in details the time
Yeah,
series,
yeah. I'll be talking
the
about
basics of time
ARIMA
series.
models over here in details.
Yeah, so the time series model has four components like cyclicality,
Hmm.
seasoning. So we'll
Hmm.
cover all
Hmm.
that part
Hmm. Hmm.
basic, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So the other thing is that yeah.
at this stage, what we are doing is we are identifying the statistical method that we need to discuss. Where do we need to discuss? Why do we need to discuss? Right? And how are the figures? Because whatever we are doing for the figure models, right? So how are the figure models? What is the framework of developing the figure models? So that's what we are discussing right now. Then we'll go to talk about the statistical methods, because if we do it together, it will become a huge open-ended area. So first I close on this way. So once you know, okay, given a method or given a asset, I need to calculate the PD like this, LGD like this, EAD like this, and the macroeconomic variables like this. So this is the framework which is closed. After that,
Okay.
we take up the statistical methods and explore how we can do that.
Okay. 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 One more thing is that I tried looking for some a book or a book on IFRS 9 impairment modeling over the internet, but there is only one book which is available at Amazon and Flipkart, so that's a very costly one. It's coming for 9 to 10,000. So by any chance, do you have any ebook or like
See,
PDF
don't
wherein
go
like
for ebooks. I'll suggest you the EY paper. EY paper. It's the EY impairment of financial instruments, right?
yeah, yeah,
So
but that those papers are like at a bit higher level, and they just talk. They do not talk about that like the how product is moving, customer is moving from stage one to stage three to
no, the
and three
EY
and
paper
those things.
discusses that. The EY paper discusses that. So for this, right, I will suggest you to use white papers from Deloitte, EY, and KPMG. Don't go for any
Oh,
books at this stage, right? Because
okay.
number one is one problem with books is that books need to be read in a sequential and a coherent manner, right? Now the type of work that we are into, and we will not get that time to walk around it like that, right? So from that perspective, I suggest be work on white papers at this point of time, because Deloitte EY KPMG, they're fantastic working papers, and they have fantastic white papers around this domain. So I strongly recommend white papers. If you want, I can share with you the ones that I have.
Yeah, yeah, that would be very helpful. And if you can also give a little bit description, like this is the most simplest and most detailed paper which we should start with.
So the
So we
EY
can
paper
go
is
through
the
that.
one that you can start with, because that paper is very basic in nature, and it covers all the aspects of
Okay.
IFRS.
So if you can share that, it would be helpful for us.
I think I have shared it with you guys. Okay, anyways,
No.
I'll do it again. I'll do it again. I'll do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tanmay, one more thing
Uh-huh.
regarding the recordings. I think I was just matching the invitations along with the recordings. I feel for CRM and IFRS 9, a few recordings are still missing. So I think for January and WIT. So I will share that with you.
Share
Maybe
the
you can
dates
match
with
it up.
me, because
Yeah.
there are a couple of recordings which are there with me. I need to upload that, right? But for
Yeah.
IFRS 9, I believe it's up to date. It's up to date.
Okay.
Tanmay, I think one class is
Ha,
missing
the
for
last
IFRS 9.
weekend
That's
class is
what.
missing. I'll upload that now. But otherwise,
No,
sorry.
before to last also.
Can you just share with
No
me the
problem. I'll
dates?
match it up and share the dates.
Ha 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 ha. Match it up and share
Okay.
the dates with me.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, that would be helpful, Piyush.
Yeah. Now, if you see that some recordings are missing, now often what happens is that due to some quality issue, they may not be recorded. So I did not have the license of GoToMeeting till yesterday. I got it today itself. Right. So often it happens is that what GoToMeetings had done is that they did not give you access to download it into your system. It was there in their interface from where I used to download it. Often there would be issues around that. So for classes which you missed out, right, just check the next recording which is up there. You would see that I had summarized up the discussion, and then I had started off with the new topics in such cases. So in that way it can be done. But anyways, just share the dates with me. I'll give you the instructions. Right? I'll tell you whether it's there or not. I'll check and tell.
Thank you.
Okay? So please do it both for CRM and this thing, IFRS.
Yeah, okay.
Okay? Yeah, and start going through the recordings, guys. So start going through the recordings and start preparing it, because
Yeah.
March is nearing, and I'll try to finish this off by March end, so that you guys are prepared on both on IFRS 9 side as well as on this CRM side to take it up.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you for your time. Have a great weekend. Bye bye.